When Mar and I were missionaries in Portugal, we loved having mission teams come. People come to work with us on the project or run one of the programs that we're running. We loved having mission teams come, and we hosted several teams. Every team that came, I gave them a warning. There was something I had to warn them about, and I usually warned them sometimes before they got there. If not, within the first 24 to 48 hours of you being there, I warned them about this. And no, it wasn't don't drink the water. On some mission trips, man, if you drink the water, that is going to significantly change your experience, right? It wasn't that. The water was safe to drink in Portugal. But it was a warning about something that could be just as devastating to your mission trip experience. And it's something that I knew from personal experience. It was a mistake I had made on my very first overseas missions trip and had kind of ruined the trip, although very few people really felt it or knew it. They didn't see it, but I saw it and I felt it. And it was such a significant thing that I had to later apologize to the missionary that I'd served with. And I went back a second time 3 years later just to try again, to try to make it right. So what was this warning that I would give to mission teams that was based in my own personal painful experience? And it was this: goal shift. I'd warn them about goal shift. I think every mission team came to work with us with the same goal. Their goal at the beginning was to serve the missionary, to help out however they could. And they came almost with a blank slate, right? Like, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll do whatever I can. I just want to be helpful. But then as the project goes on, it shifts. I saw it happen several times, and I would call people out and go, hey, don't forget about goal shift, what I told you. It would shift like this. It would go from I came to serve and just do whatever I could to I came to get this done. Maybe they were doing a construction project and they want to get that wall built, or they want to get that room finished, or whatever. And I understand that. It makes so much sense. Like I said, I did this myself. The goal shifts from being a servant or learning what it's really like to be a missionary to accomplishing a certain thing before you go home. And that makes so much sense because we are Americans, right? We love to accomplish. We love to check the box, that's done. We love to have something that we can take a picture of, something we can point to, something we can feel good about. And I saw this play out several times. Goal shift. Goal shift. The original goal, to serve, or the original goal was to learn what it's like to live on mission in this other country. And over time, the goal shifted to, I want to get through this and I want to get back home, or I want to get this thing done, or I want to have something I can feel good about, or something like that. And I got to tell you, every time it happened, there was a negative effect on the overall ministry and on the experience that mission team member had there in Portugal, or like I had on my first mission trip. So, goal shift. We're going to talk about it a little later today, but right now, let's just get the definition nailed down. Goal shift is a subtle yet significant change in one's primary objective. A subtle change in one's primary objective is what happened there. Well, that was goal shift. It went from the primary objective being, I'm here to serve, or I'm here to learn, to I'm here to get this done, or I'm here to be done and go back home, or I'm here to reestablish a certain reasonable level of comfort, or something like that. Let's get back to Nehemiah's story and his mission trip to Jerusalem. After the wall had been built, but before the big celebration, something amazing happened. Revival. Let me tell you how it happened. All the Israelites gathered, and Ezra read the original covenant between God and them that Moses had written down. And he read about how God had rescued them from slavery in Egypt, and how God had chosen them to be his people group and had initiated a covenant relationship with them, and had detailed the blessings that he would give and the expectations that he had of them. And when they heard it and they understood it all, they began to weep. They were broken over their behavior. They were broken over their ancestors' behavior. They were broken. Well, Ezra, Nehemiah, and the others who were explaining the law to them told them that instead of weeping, today was a day to celebrate their God. And so they stopped weeping and they responded by celebrating one of the festivals that was described in the law that they had just heard. And they did this for 7 days. Then the people gathered again, this time to humble themselves before God and confess their sins and the sins of their ancestors. Chapter 9 is their prayer. And they ended their prayer with an honest description of their condition and a plea for God to intervene on their behalf. Then they made a vow. We're going to jump in with Nehemiah 9, verse 38. In view of all this, the prayer that they had just prayed, we are making a binding agreement in writing on a sealed document containing the names of our leaders, Levites, and priests. Now, I could get very nerdy about this vow and how it follows the format of a typical Jewish or Hittite covenant. It contains almost all the parts that you would normally find in one of those types of covenants, including the antecedent history, the stipulations, both basic and specific, witnesses, and here's a slide to show you just all the people who signed. They were witnesses of this vow, right? And then it also contains a section detailing the curses and the blessings. In other words, what will happen if you keep the covenant? What will happen if you break the covenant? But instead of focusing on all those pieces and parts and pointing out the history and all that stuff, I want to focus on the commitments that they made. So let's read them. This is Nehemiah 10, verses 28 to 39. The rest of the peoples, the priests, Levites, gatekeepers, singers, and temple servants, along with their wives, sons, and daughters, everyone who is able to understand and who has separated themselves from the surrounding peoples to obey the law of God, join with their noble brothers and commit themselves with a sworn oath to follow the law of God given through God's servant Moses and to obey carefully all the commands, ordinances, and statutes of the Lord our God. And then they spell it out. Verse 30. We will not give our daughters in marriage to the surrounding peoples, and we will not take their daughters as wives for our sons. When the surrounding people bring merchandise or any kind of grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or a holy day. We will also leave the land uncultivated in the 7th year and will cancel every debt. We will impose the following commands on ourselves: to give 1/8 of an ounce of silver yearly for the service of the house of the Lord our God, the bread displayed before the Lord, the daily grain offering, the regular burnt offering, the Sabbath and new moon offerings, the appointed festivals, the holy things, the sin offerings to atone for Israel, and for all the work of the house of our God. We've cast lots among the priests, Levites, and people for a donation of wood by our ancestral families at the appointed times each year. They are to bring the wood to our God's house to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. We will bring the first fruits of our land and of every fruit tree to the Lord's house year by year. We will also bring the firstborn of our sons and our livestock as prescribed by the law. We will bring the firstborn of our herds and flocks to the house of our God, to the priests who serve in our God's house. We will bring a loaf from our first batch of dough to the priests at the storerooms of the house of our God. And we will also bring the first fruits of our grain offerings, of every fruit tree, and of every new wine and fresh oil. 1/10 of our land's produce belongs to the Levites, for the Levites are to collect the 1/10 offering of all of our agricultural towns. A priest from Aaron's descendants is to accompany the Levites when they collect the 10th. And the Levites are to take 1/10 of this offering to the storerooms of the treasury of the house of our God. For the Israelites and the Levites are to bring the contributions of grain, new wine, and fresh oil to the storerooms where the articles of the sanctuary are kept and where the priests who minister are, along with the gatekeepers and singers. We will not neglect the house of our God. You can boil all that down to 3 things. We will keep ourselves pure. And we'll do that by not intermarrying with people of other faiths. Number 2, we will keep the Sabbath. And then number 3, we will honor God by providing for the sacrifices and the temple staff, right? All that bit about collection and first fruits and all that. It was making sure that the temple staff had the supplies they need and had the stuff they needed just for daily living. It was what they paid the staff. Well, in chapter 11 and chapter 12, you find a little bit more of what Nehemiah does in the remaining years that he is governor. They dedicated the wall. Nehemiah got people to move back into the city so it didn't feel so empty. Then he put systems in place for the support of the Levites and the temple staff. And then Nehemiah returned to his job of working for King Artaxerxes. It had been a long 12 years, but mission accomplished, right? Done, yeah. Not entirely. There was a relapse. Nehemiah 13, jumping back in at verse 6. While all this was happening, I was not in Jerusalem because I had returned to the king Artaxerxes of Babylon in the 32nd year of his reign. It was only later that I asked the king for a leave of absence so that I could return to Jerusalem. Then I discovered the evil that Eliashib had done on behalf of Tobiah by providing him a room in the courts of God's house. I was greatly displeased and threw all of Tobiah's household possessions out of that room. I ordered that the rooms be purified, and I had the articles of the house of God restored there along with the grain offerings and frankincense. I also found out that because the portions for the Levites had not been given, each of the Levites and the singers performing the service had gone back to his own field. Therefore, I rebuked the officials, asking, why was the house of God neglected? I gathered the Levites and singers together and stationed them at their posts. Then all Judah brought a tenth of the grain, new wine, and fresh oil into the storehouses. I also appointed as treasurers of the storehouses the priest S, the scribe Z, P, the Levites, H, the son of Zachar, son of M, to assist them because they were considered trustworthy. They were responsible for the distribution to their colleagues. Remember me for this, my God, and don't erase the deeds of faithful love I've done for the house of my God and for its services. At that time, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath. They were also bringing in stores of grain and loading them on donkeys, along with wine and grapes and figs. All kinds of goods were being brought to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I warned them against selling food on that day. The Tyrians living there were importing fish and all kinds of merchandise and selling them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah in Jerusalem. And I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this evil you're doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Didn't your ancestors do the same so that God brought all this disaster on us and on this city? And now you are rekindling his anger against Israel by profaning the Sabbath. When the shadows began to fall on the city gates of Jerusalem just before the Sabbath, I gave orders that the city gates be closed and not open until after the Sabbath. I posted some of my men at the gates so that no goods could enter during the Sabbath day. Once or twice the merchants and those who sell all kinds of goods camped outside Jerusalem. But I warned them, why are you camping in front of the wall? If you do it again, I'll use force against you. And after that, they did not come again on the Sabbath. Then I instructed the Levites to purify themselves and guard the city gates in order to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember me for this also, my God, and look on me with compassion according to the abundance of your faithful love. In those days, I also saw Jews who had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod or the language of one of the other peoples, but could not speak Hebrew. I rebuked them and cursed them, beat some of their men, pulled out their hair. I forced them to take an oath before God and said, you must not give your daughters in marriage to their sons or take their daughters as wives for your sons or yourselves. Didn't King Solomon of Israel sin in matters like this? There was not a king like him among many nations. He was loved by his God, and God made him king over all of Israel, yet foreign women drew him into sin. Why then should we hear about you doing all this terrible evil and acting unfaithfully against our God by marrying foreign women? Even one of the sons of Jehoiada, son of the high priest Eliashib, had become a son-in-law to Sanballat the Hornite. So I drove him away from me. Remember them, my God, for defiling the priesthood, as well as the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. So I purified them from everything foreign and assigned specific duties to each of the priests and Levites. I also arranged for the donation of wood at the appointed times and for the first fruits. Remember me, my God, with favor. Wow. Chapter 13 doesn't sound anything like the vow that they made in chapter 10, does it? Right? In chapter 10, they made a vow, we will keep ourselves pure. In chapter 13, you find out they've married people from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and other places. In chapter 10, they vowed, we'll keep the Sabbath, God, we'll keep the Sabbath. And then in chapter 13, you find that they're working on the Sabbath. They're loading up their donkeys, they're hauling stuff, and then they're doing commerce on the Sabbath. In chapter 10, you see the vow that they've written and signed their names to. We will honor God by providing for the sacrifices and paying the temple staff. In chapter 13, you find out the temple staff is gone. They hadn't been paid. And so they had to leave to go back to their hometown and get work on their own. And you find out the guys had not delivered the wood for the sacrifices. Revival, relapse, big time. Third thing, reform. Nehemiah observed many things that were wrong, but everything he observed he quickly addressed so that the people would be faithful to God and not experience any of the curses associated with the covenant. And there we are. We're at the end of the book of Nehemiah. It just ends, remember me, my God, with favor. And that's it. We don't know. Do the people keep their vow finally? How long does Nehemiah stay this time? Are they good? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. What I want to focus on in the next couple minutes is the cause of that relapse. I mean, the people, they had a genuine revival. So I don't believe for a moment that the cause of the relapse was insincerity. So it wasn't insincerity. I think their revival was real. I think their joy was real. I think their tears were real. They really, really meant it. So what caused the relapse? Well, I think it's more than simply a case of while the cat's away, the mice will play, right? While Nehemiah's gone, a couple bad people will influence them, and then off they go do the bad. I think it's more than that, but it could be partially that. I think it's more than the fact that promises and laws are incapable of changing a heart, right? They'd made some promises, and they'd put down some vows, and they created some new laws, or at least they agreed that they would keep the old laws and then created some very strict but very specific guidelines for themselves. And that was all well and good. But none of that changed their hearts, right? Their old nature didn't go away just because they'd made a promise. You and I are familiar with this. We've experienced this ourselves. The promises, God, I'll never do this again, or God, I will do that. Promises are not enough. Laws are not enough. We long to live in a country where we have really good laws, but laws won't change a person's heart. Friends, that's why we need Jesus. Right? If you are not a Jesus follower, you've probably made at some point in your life some promises that you are not keeping. You've made perhaps some vows that you're not keeping. Right? You've set up some structures to help you, some routines, maybe some habits, some things, right? Resolutions. You set all of it up, and yet you find that yourself keep going back to those old things. It's because we still have an old heart. This is why you need Jesus, because Jesus is the one who gives us a new heart to offset the old heart. I think it's more, the relapse was more than simply the fact that promises and laws are incapable of changing a heart. I think the most likely cause, but the scriptures don't say this, so I'm speculating, but I really believe the most likely cause of the relapse was goal shift. Goal shift, that thing that I mentioned real early in our time together, goal shift. Think about the goal that they had. When Nehemiah first got there and he told them about what God had done so far and just pointed out again the plight that they had, their goal, I think, was to get it built, right? Get this wall built. And they were fired up about it. They were motivated and inspired. And I think that was their goal. Get it built, get the wall built. And then, before they even got a chance to celebrate the building of the wall coming to completion, revival breaks out. And now the goal shifts again. But now the goal is now to get right with God. And it just drove them. God, we want to be right with you. We want to have a relationship with you. We want to do it your way. God, we want to be right with you. And I think that goal was there for a good period of time, but at some point afterwards, I think the goal shifted again to something more like this. To get on with life or to get back to normal. To get on with life or to get back to normal, right? When the wall was being built, that was such an intense time. It was an awesome time. The stories that they would tell their kids, but it was intense and kind of a little bit draining. And then when they got right with God, that was intense time too, as they were like trying to find everything that they were doing wrong and fix it all, right? And that was an intense time. And then one of the things about an intense time is it can be awesome. But man, it's a shock to your system. Right? It's a shock, and it can be a little draining at times. And so I think what happened was over time, perhaps when Nehemiah left, it just kind of like, this downshift and goal shift set in. To get on with life or get back to normal, like something not quite so intense, not quite so focused. And with that goal shift came compromise in their walk with God. I bet these compromises didn't seem like a big deal. And in fact, some of them probably made sense from a certain perspective. Like, right? But they were compromises that eventually led to them breaking promises that they had made with joy and sincerity. I can imagine, as they're rationalizing some of these things that they're going to do that weren't exactly right, but in their mind they didn't seem horrible. Like, I can imagine, they're looking at somebody and they're picking out a spouse for their kid. And I can imagine them saying, like, I know she isn't Jewish, right? But she's cute and she has no problem with me and my son continuing to follow our Jewish traditions. Besides, her family's well off and we could really use the dowry that she brings. Or I can imagine making this compromise. They know you're not really supposed to sell on the Sabbath, but man, this fish isn't going to keep till Sunday. And so you just buy what you need for today, right? You're not really supposed to, but you get it. It's fresh fish. Or it's going to rain tomorrow. And I know I'm not supposed to work on the Sabbath, but it's going to rain tomorrow, and I've got to get this done today. And so they do it. Or maybe it comes time to send in that tenth, that tithe with the Levites, and stuff's going on, and it's crazy time in the family, and they got this going on, that going on, and so the logic is like, I'll send in my tenth, I'll send in my tithe next time we go to Jerusalem. I can't make it there this time, and the guy didn't come around, and I didn't have it all together, so even if he'd come, so I'll do it next time. And those compromises maybe didn't seem like a huge deal, or maybe they seemed to actually make sense. It's like, chill. It's just 2 fish and 2 loaves of bread. Or chill. It's just this once, right? Those compromises that seemed to make sense in the moment led eventually to them breaking promises that were huge. And the results could have been devastating and certainly would have been had Nehemiah not gotten back in time and brought about reform. The results of goal shift are almost always devastating over the long haul when it comes to our mission and our relationship with God. And that leads to the lay hero principle of part 4. A lay hero has to be hyper vigilant about goal shift. A lay hero has to be hyper vigilant about goal shift. As a lay hero, probably the biggest threat you're going to face isn't the obstacles that we talked about in part 3. Probably the biggest threat you're going to face isn't the opposition that we talked about in part 3. Probably the biggest threat to your mission and your relationship with God and all that God wants to do in you and through you, probably the biggest threat to all that is goal shift. That temptation to change your goal from enjoying God and doing His will to settling in and finding a way to make life a little bit more comfortable. That's the goal shift that takes place so often among lay heroes. We shift from our goal being, God, I want to know you. God, I want to do your will. God, I want to see you do this thing, fix this problem, save these people. That kind of very intense, very noble life goes from experiencing God and doing God's will to settling in, finding a more comfortable pace, finding a way to make life a little bit more comfortable. A lay hero knows that the lure of a comfortable life is highly tempting to all of us. And a lay hero knows that giving in is devastating to one's mission and one's personal experience of a relationship with God. When Mara and I were living in Portugal, life was good, but almost never comfortable. If you came to visit us, we did our best to show you in 10 days all the treats and all the favorite things that we might have in a year. And so it was awful. We gained weight every time people came, but it was also fun. We showed them all this stuff. But it was a little bit deceitful too, because while you were there, you could walk away with this understanding that life was really great and it was good, but it was not comfortable in any way. So when we came back, one of the things that I personally have to fight is goal shift. I lived outside of my comfort zone so far. I used to joke about it. I'm like, I am so far outside of my comfort zone most of the time in Portugal that when I look in the rearview mirror, I can't even see my comfort zone back there. I'm so far past it, I can't even see it in the rearview mirror, right? And so when I got back, I just kept facing this constant temptation to find a way to make it a little more comfortable, to find a way to reestablish a reasonable level of comfort, of not being out there quite so far all the time. Is this something perhaps you can relate to? Perhaps. So the bad news is this. The lure of a more comfortable life is tempting to even the most sincere lay hero. But the good news is this. Goal shift is avoidable. You can't avoid opposition. You can't avoid experiencing obstacles. But you can avoid falling prey to goal shift. And to do so, you're going to need regular, honest evaluation of what goal is it you're pursuing. You're going to need a plan for keeping yourself focused. And that plan needs to include some form of Christian community to help you. And so I want to leave you with a few questions and really encourage you to answer them honestly. What is your present goal? What's your primary objective right now? Friends, be honest with yourself. Of all the lies we tell, the ones we tell ourselves are the deadliest. Friends, the danger of goal shift may be far nearer and far greater than you thought. So, what's your plan? What's your plan for staying focused on the right goal? When people would come to Portugal, I would meet with them most evenings or in the mornings, and at days 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, if you're on part of a mission trip team, I would remind you, hey, watch out for goal shift today. Watch out for goal shift. And I would ask them to tell me again what their goal is often. I didn't do it every day, but I would often do that. That was my plan, to help them stay focused, because the last thing I wanted them to do is the mistake that I had made on that first mission trip. The last thing I wanted to do is spend more than $1,000 to come here with noblest of intentions and to miss out on what could happen while they were there. That's the last thing I wanted to happen to you. So what's your plan? What's your plan? I'm not going to call you every 2 days and say, hey, watch out for goal shift. You need a plan of your own. What is your plan for staying focused on the right goal? And who are you going to help? And who's going to help you do that? Imagine a community of lay heroes who help each other stay focused on the goal, not give in to goal shift, not give in to the lure of making life a little bit more reasonably comfortable. Right? Instead, stay focused on that goal. God, I want to know you. God, I want to experience you. I want to do your will, because I'm a lay hero and you're my God. Imagine a community of lay heroes living, helping each other do that. Takes your breath away, doesn't it? That could be awesome. I'm praying for you. Watch out for goal shift. I'll see you in part 5.